Hello and welcome to the ISRK podcast. I'm your host, Kumar Vikrant. I'm a doctoral candidate at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Hanyang University, Seoul, Korea. ISRK, that is Indian Students and Researchers in Korea, is a voluntary support group that works towards the benefit of the Indian diaspora in Korea. On today's episode, I have the pleasure to be in conversation with Professor Scott Sefford, who is an assistant professor of English at Chongshin University in Seoul. Scott, thank you very much for taking out the time to join the podcast, and it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you.
Yes. Scott, so while researching your career and your recent writings, I came across your 2021 and 22 paper in Shakespeare Journal, Taylor and Francis, and I was interested, so I just took a sneak peek into it, and it was very interesting to see what's going on in English literature and what you're writing. So can you help our viewers understand how modern research in English language and literature looks like? Because most of my peers and including myself, we come from a science and tech background, so we do not really have an insight of how that works in the humanities and arts. So can you talk about that? And also, how was your experience talking with interviewing director John Cade, who is a well-acclaimed stage director and writer? So can you talk about that a bit?
Well, a very interesting question, and it's very modern to be interviewing me about interviewing someone else.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'll start with John Caird. He's
Yeah.
a director. He's British, and I actually first interviewed him while I was doing my PhD.
Okay.
So the published interview that you saw was
Mhm.
actually my second time interviewing him.
Oh yeah,
He's very
I think it was mentioned somewhere that you interviewed him earlier, and then yeah. Mhm.
Right, and he's very willing and open to talk about his work, and I was very grateful to him. I mean, he's been directing for a very long time, and
Yeah.
he's got some very big name, productions under his belt. So it was really fun to interview him. I've interviewed, a fair few directors over the course of my research, and John Caird, he's very experienced and he knows what he's talking about. He has some strong views, and I think that's interesting and always,
Yeah.
valuable to have a discussion like that. More generally, in terms of research in English literature, which is primarily where my work lies, I think it is what you make it. And the work that I've done and the articles which you're alluding to,
Mm.
they're just was something that I was interested in, and so I
Yep.
researched it and wrote about it. So the 2021 article was actually stemming from my PhD, and
Uh-huh.
I had spent a long time in theatre archives in London and comparing the texts of Hamlet, the sort of
Yeah.
published text, with the text that we use in performance. And so really, I think I actually don't know very much about the kind of research you do,
Yeah.
but most of the research that I do is based on primary and secondary sources, where we go into archives or various different places and then look at primary material, and then we also look at secondary sources and sort of see what other people are saying, and then try to come up with an argument about that.
Yeah, I
But
would
I think
like,
it's
yeah, it was very interesting to see like journals publishing interviews. For example, your 2022 article was mainly the interview with John Cade, and um, I didn't see much of a, like an interpretation or an angle you're putting in. It was like a conversation that was published. So I found it fascinating that journals would be interesting in those kind of stuff, like publishing interviews. So that's why I asked, like, what kind of research goes on in there. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, actually, often what I found when I was doing my research was that a lot of time people were writing about directors almost like they
Oh
didn't
yeah.
exist. And I found actually all you need to do is go ask them, and they'll tell you, and you've got the answer. And so particularly with the interview, I thought that, this is something that we need to see more of, is seeing the more practical side of
Yeah.
how performances are staged.
Yeah, like directly presenting what the director is actually saying
Yeah.
instead of like maybe deconstructing it or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, although there is space for
Sure, sure,
analyzing
sure.
performances.
Yeah.
And actually I have another article coming out, a
Hmm.
review of a
Oh, okay.
performance of King Lear, and in that case I didn't speak to the director, I just wrote my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of space for all these different kinds of
Sure, sure.
approaches.
Is that
Yeah.
under peer review or like you're still
It's been
drafting it?
accepted. It went through peer review, and now
Oh, wow,
it's just in
congratulations.
the last.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Hmm. So it's
Yeah,
in an academic journal, or we'll get to read it, or
it's in the same. It's the same journal,
ah,
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare. Ah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I'll try to read it and try to understand, but I suspect it will be way beyond my expertise. So yeah,
Well, hopefully this one is quite accessible. It's coming near to a journal near you,
sure.
so I'll let you know when it's published. You can have
Sure,
a
sure.
read.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. So Scott, I wanted to also ask you about the state of humanities in the present day state in universities. Maybe you can talk about the Korean scenario or the global scenario as you wish. Mainly, I think I heard it in one of the podcasts. I'm not sure. People say that humanities is the heart of the institute. Like, if you can read, write, articulate, then you are invincible. Stuff like that. So what is your take on it, and how do you see humanities growing and the current state of it in the global or Korean scenario?
It's a fascinating question. I think I personally have never heard it said that human
Uh,
with if you can
I
read
think
clearly, read and write.
I heard it on I think the Jordan Peterson podcast, or I don't
I
know
see.
which guest said that, but yeah, I found it very interesting. So,
Yeah. It's an interesting idea. I think when I hear that, I kind of think globally about a big
uh-huh.
issue which is going on right now, with Ukraine.
Mm,
And when I think about this idea of you can write, or if you can write, then you're invincible. And I think about what's going on in Ukraine, I think it's clear that that's
mm,
obviously not true on one level.
sure,
And you know, to have a society, you need to have all different aspects of it, including humanities and also,
sure, sure.
STEM and all of these areas. And when I think about Ukraine and I think about what's going on there, I think right now the thing that they need, the thing that is necessary, is not humanity, like philosophy or history, but is action. And sometimes when I'm writing for the Korea Times, I kind of wonder, is there any point to me writing this? Because
Mm,
the big global players are going to do what they want to do without whatever I write or whatever
sure.
anyone says. But then I actually think there is very much a space in the world for humanities and for thinking and for philosophy and history. And you can use that for good or you can use that for ill. And I think in one sense, what I try to do with my own writing is I try to work for the good of humanity, and that's in my teaching, but in my writing as well.
Yeah.
And uh, on the other hand, you can use humanities for ill, and I think
Sure.
with
We
Vladimir
saw all
Putin,
that
when
propaganda, especially in the
right,
20th century. Propaganda was everything. So,
yeah, and I mean, just because you like poetry or you like painting doesn't mean you're not going to do terrible things.
sure.
So what I try to do in some of my teaching is I try to help my students know how to think
Yeah,
and
yeah.
know how to question authority when it is actually acting in an evil way or in a way which is wrong.
Yeah.
And actually I teach in a Christian university. I am a Christian,
Mm,
and I I hope that through my work I can sort of show the love of God to my students and to help them do that as well. Most of my students are Christians. So I hope that through humanities I can work some good and show love to this world where there's so much
yeah. Oh,
darkness and pain.
that's beautiful words.
So
And also very inspiring as well. And it's funny that you mentioned Christianity because yesterday I was in Myeongdong Cathedral with my wife.
right.
Yesterday we went to that area and we heard uh, um, very beautiful Catholic prose going on. I don't know what you call it, like hymns. People were singing and all that. So yeah, that's really fascinating. Like interesting. You mentioned Christianity, and I was yesterday at a cathedral. So anyway,
Right.
so
Yeah.
that's interesting. And Professor, can you briefly talk about your career trajectory? Because I'm asking this because many times when I interact with students, particularly grad students or even undergrad students who are coming up into the trying to doing their masters and PhDs, so they often ask about like how is the career progression in case of humanities, especially in English language and literature domain. Can you like just flesh it out a bit and give us an overview in this regard?
In regards to how to progress, or in terms of my own,
Um, what a
or
typical
both.
higher education looks like in case of English language and literature, what people do after graduating, or what
Mm.
you have in your experience, what have you seen people doing? So,
Yeah, good question. I mean, there are a lot of jobs you can do with a
Sure.
degree in
Yes.
humanities. And
Yeah.
one of my very good friends, he studied history, and then he went and had a sort of very successful career in business, which had nothing to do with history. And in some ways, degree or university education isn't always necessary about the specific facts that you
Sure.
learn, or about the
Sure.
specific, just because I read this poem, it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily teach me something that I will use this particular poem for. But I think it teaches you a way to think. I hope it teaches a way to think, and a way to approach the world, and a way to understand the world.
Yeah.
And so with that, you can go on into all kinds of different careers. Obviously, studying English, a lot of people going on to be teachers,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
like writers, or
Hmm.
journalists or something like that. But that's
Yeah.
that's not written. It's not written in your fate that you
Sure.
must
Like
become a teacher.
Isaac Asimov was from science, but he wrote many novels. That's
Right.
literature. So yeah.
Yeah. And conversely, there's plenty of
Sure.
sort of people who study humanities, and then, well, I suppose it's not that different, but going on into politics and those kinds of things, a lot of humanities students end up doing that. I think in the UK, we always have prime ministers who
Oh yes.
studied PPE
Yeah.
in Oxford
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever. They're basically studying humanities. But I think what I would say about career is that, especially in my own case, what I did was I kind of hate myself for saying this, but you do what you love, and then you
Yeah.
try to find a way to make money from it. And
Sure.
that's what I did, and
Mhm.
I really do enjoy all the work I do, or almost all the work I do.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's better to be doing a job where you feel fulfilled and you feel
Yes.
like you're
Yes.
making a difference, rather than doing something which maybe
Mhm.
society expects you to do. And
Right. Because
I
that's
mean,
not sustainable.
yeah,
Yeah. That's not
yeah,
sustainable.
certainly not. And Korea, in Korea, there's a sort of strong emphasis on success. You must do your
Oh
best.
yes.
You must go to, and I
Well,
I don't think that's helpful.
not only in
Yeah, go
Korea,
on.
Professor. Uh, well, most like from the society I come from back home, it's almost the
Yeah.
same. Yeah.
Right. And I think that can be really unhealthy. I mean, it
Yeah.
can lead to some good results. And
Yep.
if you look at the history of Korea, of South Korea, in the past sort of 50 years, the way that it has developed, economically, is unbelievable. It's just incredible.
Unbelievable. It's like
Yeah.
in a short expanse of time, there was a word for it. I don't remember it right now.
The
Yeah.
miracle on the Han River.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one like one. There was one more technical word. I think David Taser told me in the podcast. Super hyper something. Yeah. So it basically
Okay.
means like expanding exponentially in a very small amount of time with more
Yes.
focus on the economic sectors.
Very much super hyper something. You're
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
right. And
Absolutely.
that has been developed. It's incredible. It's great, I think. But there was a real price to pay in terms of
Yeah.
the suffering of the people, I think. And Korea now is at a point where it's a pretty rich country. And I don't think we should keep up that same level of just
Sure.
work, like obsessive work with no rest, and no peace, and no playing. I think that's
E-
unhealthy. And
Everything is Pali. So.
yeah, Bali Bali. I actually wrote an article about that a couple of
Uh-huh.
years ago.
Okay. Hmm.
Yeah, so I think that's unhealthy. So I do hope that people can do what they want to do, whether that's
Sure.
working in a
Sure.
shop or working in a university. It doesn't matter. But doing something that's worthwhile, that you feel is worthwhile, is much better than doing something that you just
Yeah.
feel
It's
like is a
yeah.
drain on your life.
I always also say that to many people who come to me asking for opinions and things like that. I always say that those kinds of things is not sustainable, and you have to find a way to at least practice everything in moderation, or try to balance and try to find what pleases you and is also beneficial for people around you. So yeah.
Yeah.
Moving ahead, Professor, what do you see English playing a role in the present day Korean society? What is how do you say, like what role is English playing in today's Korea? Because as you know, like globalization is happening already. It's everything is connected. People are coming in, people are going out. So what is the present? How do you put it? Like what English means to Koreans, or like what is its role in the society at present here?
It's a really interesting question. And I'm not sure there's one single answer.
Sure.
For many of the younger Koreans, English is something which they have to. I mean, English
Are
is
they
is,
are they
is
taught it in the
required.
school?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
from a young age, and
Okay.
it kind of becomes a symbol of education and status if you can speak English
Oh.
very well. And
Mm.
at the same time, I think it's useful to be able to speak English because it's the global language,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
it opens so many doors for traveling and experiencing all kinds of different things.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think English is a kind of a confusing picture at the moment because in in some quarters, some students just absolutely hate it, and
Yes.
I don't blame them. Being
Sure.
forced to learn language, even at university, in my university, you can't graduate unless you pass the English course,
Oh, I see.
and
Oh.
I can understand why people might resent that. I mean, still, if they're going to graduate, they need to study it, but I can understand how they may feel like this is not something
Sure.
they want to do, especially if they're studying something like music and they feel like they shouldn't need to study it. Although I do think English is a very useful language to know, and I'm very blessed that I grew up with English as my mother tongue, so I can
Yeah.
speak to
Yeah.
people, from all over the world.
Also, because of the British heritage back home in India, we also got to learn English throughout our high school. So yeah.
Yeah, and I've many Indians speak English. I believe I might be wrong about this, but there are more English speakers in India than there are in the UK. So
Oh, okay.
this really is an English. It's a global language,
Yeah.
uh, and it's useful. And I think a lot of Koreans understand that, but
Yep. Yep.
some resent it, and I can understand that resentment as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Moving ahead, like a similar question. I often hear about Hallyu a lot, like the Korean wave, and often written about in newspapers, including the Korea Times. And what I see is, in fact, it's real because I see it myself from my eyes, like people talking about Korean culture, even in the remotest parts of India, people from
Right.
back home, they know about like BTS and aespa and everything else. So Korean culture, in fact, is having its like peak moment at the like everywhere Korea is
Yes.
there. So definitely Hallyu is transporting Korean culture outside. How do you think the reverse case is? Like people because of Hallyu, even I read about Hallyu visa going to be issued by the government soon, only for the Korean cultural purposes. So anyway, so people coming from outside into Korea, and they then the uh, Koreans here, they need to like the business booms and there's a huge demand for English related stuff, but for the Korean stuff translated into English and stuff like that. So how do you think Hallyu is having a reverse effect on the Korean society where people are more indulging in learning English and trying to connect that with the Korean culture? What is your take on that?
Well, it's a complicated issue, and I'm actually writing about this
Oh, okay.
right now. So I told you, research in the
I
field of
think yeah, it
literature.
may be a good topic for research. Like I don't know whether
Yeah,
there is any data or anything like that. Yeah.
right. Well, I mean, the thing is, research in the field of literature is what you make it, which is what I
Yeah.
said before. And for the moment, my current project is I've moved away from studying Shakespeare, and I'm looking at the way K-drama portrays what it means to be foreign and what it means to
Oh,
be
I see.
Korean. And
Mm.
so that's what I'm working on right now. I've got a sort of an essay which is kind of nearly finished but needs a bit of work. And clearly, Korea is not a multicultural society in the way that
Yeah,
the UK is. And
definitely.
I don't want to say that it must become a multicultural society in the way that the many Western countries have. I
Sure.
think it is good to be a multicultural society in many ways, but it's not a sort of a legal, it's not a moral requirement to become a multicultural society. However, there are many sort of non-Koreans coming into the country. We both are not Korean, but we're living here, and
Yeah.
there comes a point where the people of Korea have to kind of face up to this and
Yeah.
and talk about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's happening right now. And it's maybe starting to. But I mean, do you know the largest proportion? What country the largest proportion of non-Koreans come from?
China.
China, absolutely right.
Yeah,
And of those Chinese people living in Korea, I'm going to get the statistic wrong, but something like 47 or 74% of them are Chinese Koreans. So what we have
I
is
see.
by far the biggest number of people in Korea who are not legally Korean
Mhm.
are in fact at least culturally in some way related to Korea.
Yeah.
So still, even when you look at the statistics of the number of people
Mm.
who are like legally foreign,
Yeah.
um, that doesn't tell the whole picture because there's a large proportion of them have at least some claim to Koreanness.
Yeah.
So there's this big sort of question of what to do about foreigners in Korea, and it's a problem which I think Korea needs to face up to. And I've been trying to write about that a little bit. There is some serious xenophobia in Korea and
Yeah.
some serious racism in Korea.
Yep.
And as part of my research for my current article, I was reading a lot about the experience of children in schools
Oh yeah.
where one of their parents is Korean and one of the parents is not.
Oh yeah.
And there's some serious problems with the way education is you know, the way people approach education, especially of people from these kind of mixed backgrounds. And you know, my wife is Korean, I'm sort of not. And if we have kids, and it's
Yep.
something we're thinking about, what will happen to our kids? Will they be accepted or will they be on the outside? And
It's the same thing. I recently met David Tizard at the Hunting
right,
University, and we were having coffee, and we were talking about things, and he was mentioning the same thing as you are. Like he has two kids, right? So they are going to school, and so he was saying that they're now facing this issue, like what you're talking about. People
right,
asking whether people are asking his kids like whether you are a Vegukin or what is your background, what
right.
like, so yeah, I understand perfectly. I also read some more articles relating to that, what you're alluding to. So yeah, it's definitely an
Yeah,
issue. Yeah.
it's an issue which I think needs to be addressed, and really, it's an issue that Koreans need to address, as well as just people like us talking about it is good,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's something which the people of Korea need to talk about, and yeah, I think
Sure,
it's
sure,
still a
sure.
big
Yeah,
open issue.
a conversation needs to happen for like, and some changes with time. Obviously it's not like a switch which you can turn on and
Right,
off, but
absolutely.
with time hopefully things will get better here. Yes.
Yeah,
And
and when you think about the way the country has shifted so dramatically in a short space of time
sure. Yeah.
economically,
Mhm.
it's still catching up culturally and
Yeah.
socially.
Yeah, but things are changing, I think, at a very high pace.
Bali
And
Bali. Yeah,
hopefully, in the socio-cultural aspect as well, things will catch on. And
yeah, I
anyway,
hope so.
so moving ahead, let's talk about a bit of a politics here. Um, it may be a difficult subject, but anyways, I was very interested in the topic of the low birth rate in Korea. It seems to be like those kind of topics like everybody's interested in writing about or talking about, or even in international press as well.
Right.
People always talk about the Korean situation, and so I was like reading some articles and also hearing some podcasts, and some people were saying that it's not the issue that the government should care about because it's like a personal family issue. People can choose to have kids, do not like it's none of the government's concern. And I was like, yeah, sure, that's okay, yeah. But I read some other articles and people were saying that okay, it is government's concern because it directly impacts the economy and other whole lots of things. So what is your take? I'm interested in knowing your opinion on it, and like what's going on here. Can you like flesh that out a bit?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I see the low birth rate in Korea really as a symptom of a problem.
Yes,
I
yes,
mean, it obviously is a problem in and of itself
yeah.
because it's unsustainable. But I think it's a symptom of a deeper problem within Korean society, which is kind of often encapsulated within this notion of Hell Joseon, right?
Ah,
Hell
yes, yes,
Joseon,
yes. Mhm.
where this country is incredibly competitive.
But you
It's
often
is
hear that word being used mostly by Koreans and not
right.
by, yeah.
Only by Koreans. I don't think
Wow.
anyone
Yeah.
outside of Korea. Yeah, but I do see when I before I moved to Korea, I heard this concept and I thought, what are they talking about? Why would they say that?
Mhm.
But I've lived here for a few years now, and I can
Yeah.
see what they're talking about, which is this problem of how competitive everything
Oh,
is,
yes.
and
Mhm.
if you have children, you have to spend millions of won
Yeah, yeah.
on private education. And
I was like looking up the chart for international schools. It was
yes,
like, oof, like super
obscene.
expensive. Yeah,
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 and it's in some ways it's just impossible to afford to have
yeah,
children,
yeah.
and it's, even if you can afford to have children, all of the other pressures that you
Oh
place
yes,
on the children,
oh yes.
they're so strong that it kind of makes you not want to have, how can I bear to bring
Oh
these
yeah.
children into this such a harsh
Mm,
environment?
mm.
So my take on this whole issue is that actually the problem is not in and of itself the low birth rate. It's the problem of how obscenely competitive it is, how everyone wants to live in Seoul or Gyeonggi-do, the area
Oh
around
yeah.
Seoul.
Yes, yes.
And so everything is very expensive in terms of housing and education. And then if you can't succeed, then people kind of view you as lower, as
Oh
not
yeah.
as, and I
Failure.
think that's really wrong. Um, so as a Christian, I think that we don't get our value from our work.
Mhm.
And I hope that I view the value of someone, carrying cardboard as exactly the same as the value
Yeah.
of a president in the intrinsic worth of the human. And I don't think that is at all the way that people in Korea see each other. And I'll be honest, I get a lot of respect because I'm a professor and all of these
Ah,
kinds of things. And it's
yeah.
nice for me, but I don't think it's necessarily it's the right way
It's
to
not healthy.
run a country.
Yeah,
There's
it doesn't.
not
Yeah.
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 I mean, there's nothing wrong with working in a shop, and I
Sure.
think working in a
Sure.
shop is necessary. But if no one wants to do it, and if everyone scorns shop workers, then the country's not going to run, and
Yeah.
that's sort of what we're seeing. So I think the high population density, the high
Mhm.
competitiveness, all of these kinds of things, I think that's the
Yeah.
root cause, and the root issue which we need to address.
I also have similar opinions like you on this issue. It's a symptom of something far more sinister or far more greater than
Yeah.
just the birth rate. Or anyway, so moving ahead, Professor, do you have any tips for English speakers coming to Korea? Like what kind of mindset they should have, or if they opt to learn Korean, then do you have any tips for English speaking people to learn Korean? Yeah, can you talk about that a
Yeah.
bit? Yeah,
Yeah, certainly.
on a
I
lighter
mean,
note. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I don't know. It's pretty hard learning a
Yeah,
language.
yeah,
So before I came to Korea, I spent a few years studying Korean, and it's fun and it's very hard. And I think those two things need to be borne in mind. Learning a language as an adult, in particular,
yeah.
is kind of it can be really hard because you're used to avoiding embarrassing situations.
Yes.
But in order to learn a language, you have to just accept this is going to be embarrassing. I'm going to make
Yeah,
mistakes. It's
yeah,
going to be awkward. Embrace that. And if you have a really positive attitude where you say, this is going to be hard, but I'm going to just keep trying, keep working
yeah,
at it.
yeah, yeah.
I think it's entirely possible to learn Korean. And I think it is something that's really fun. So when I was doing my PhD, while I was studying for my PhD,
Yeah.
I was doing Korean classes once a week, kind of as a hobby. And it really helped me to de-stress and to
Back in the
relax.
UK or
Yeah, back in London, yeah.
okay.
And it was something where I could forget about all of the stuff I was worrying about and just kind of focus on this
Mm,
interesting language. For English speakers, Korean is a hard language to learn.
yeah,
There are very few similarities in terms
yeah,
of vocabulary, syntax,
yeah.
grammar structure. All of that stuff is very different. But this is a great thing to do. I think it's great
Sure.
to broaden your horizons and learn a lot of new things and to see the world differently. So it's not just that I have been trying to learn a language, but I've been trying to learn about the way that Koreans think, and the language is vital to understanding that. And so I would encourage, if you're going to move to Korea or if you already live in Korea, learning the language is very useful because there's still a lot of things you can't do if you don't speak Korean. I remember the first time I went to get my hair cut in
Oh
Korea,
yes.
and that was
Yeah.
scary.
Oh my.
I paced up and down in front of the hairdressers, uh, practicing the vocabulary on my phone, just
Mhm.
like muttering to myself like a madman. And then I finally went in, and it just all went out of my head, and I was kind of barely, I was just sort of babbling. But they cut my hair, and
This was in Seoul.
it was in Pucheon, which is just to the west of Seoul. And yeah, they didn't speak English, but I just tried my best, and they cut my hair. Now I've got to the stage where I go to the hairdressers and we have a chat, and it's more relaxed. But that kind of, especially at the beginning, it's really awkward, really difficult. And
Yeah, it's often the little things you want to do in everyday life
yeah,
that stung you a lot if you don't know the local language. So
yeah, post office, hairdressers, all of those kinds of
oh yeah,
vital things. You have to learn Korean for them, I think. Yeah, but
sure.
it's fun. Yeah,
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I wanted to ask you your perspective on is, you know, statistically, lots of Indians within the country or in the Indian diaspora, like they are often involved in science, tech, engineering, or medicine, right? Like
yes,
I was talking to one person, and they were saying that in their home back in the UK, in their little town, not London, but in their little town, all the doctors were Indians. So that tells you something, like all the major doctors were Indian. But anyway, so most Indians are like involved in these disciplines, especially Indian diaspora as well, and here as well,
hmm,
like including myself. But
yeah,
um, you know, very few. I come across very few Indian people or Indian diaspora people or other Indians like who are involved in humanities, social sciences, political sciences, or other associated disciplines. Now,
yeah,
why do you think that is? But that question may be too like specific because you have to have like lots of knowledge about the culture, society, etc. So you
yeah.
may opt to like not to answer that one. But how do we like encourage Indians to participate more in the humanities and social sciences, and like what can be done in this regard? Like, is education necessary? Like, how do we change this situation?
I mean, that's a very interesting question, and I am interested in that. I think you're probably in a better position to answer the question of why than I am.
Sure, sure, yeah,
But in terms of how to fix it or how to change it, and I mean, it's good. It is good to have people seeking to be doctors and
or
to
whether
study
is it
science.
something that needs fixing or like what we're seeing here.
Yeah, I mean, I really respect people who
Mm-hmm.
have a very high value for education, and
Yeah, yeah,
that is, what we can see with this kind of obsession with
yeah,
the STEM subjects. I do think there needs to be a balance, and
yeah,
I don't know exactly where that balance should be,
sure, yeah,
but it seems to me that there's not much sort of cultural value attached to the
yeah,
humanities
yeah,
in India, from my
it seems
experience.
like, yeah,
Yeah, and that is a cultural issue, which
yeah,
I don't know how to
yeah, yeah,
fix it necessarily, if fix it is the right word. But I do think just emphasizing the value of humanity, the fact that you know good understanding of the humanities can broaden your perspective and can make you think in new ways and experience all kinds of new things. It sort of brings a lot of joy and a lot of new ways of thinking. And I think if you kind of emphasize those aspects of it, and emphasize the ways that sort of you can understand the world through history and through
yeah,
art
yeah,
and
yeah,
literature, the way you can understand yourself better and understand humans better, um, that is a positive aspect of humanity. But STEM subjects are important as well, and it's great that there's so many
yeah,
people who want to study them.
mm-hmm.
And I don't want to discourage people from
Sure,
studying STEM
sure, yeah,
subjects if that's something they want to do.
mhm, yeah, yeah. I also think that is the issue, like the understanding not being there, like what role humanities or social sciences, etc., can play in your life. Maybe that could be one of the reasons why, or also the economic situation, financial and etc., is obviously there because like statistics say that STEM graduates like begin to earn very quickly as compared to other like they might like the stage is set if you if you like I
Right.
put it bluntly like that, like if people graduating from STEM, most of the times they have like a stage being set for them, like you have to do A, then B, and then C, and then you are like earning, and then you are
And
like
you're
set.
rich.
But
Yeah.
yeah, rich. But in other disciplines it could be that you have to discover the pathway yourself, so that could be something that like maybe
Yeah,
deters
but
people from. Yeah,
I think it's important also to understand that money isn't everything. And
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
would certainly be a lot richer if I studied a STEM subject.
sure.
But I don't want to, and I'm glad that I've taken the career path that I have chosen. And if you do not find yourself excited, or you don't want
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
then I think it's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Go ahead, go ahead. Yeah.
but if it is something that you are, something that you're
Sure.
excited by, if you want to change the world through science or technology, then do it, because it really
Yeah,
can change lives.
and that's actually accurate because I know many people back home like who are like just into STEM just for earning, and they do not have
Yes.
any heart in it. Like so I was like, no, that ain't gonna happen. Like if you if, like we talked about earlier, it's not sustainable in the long run. So
Yeah.
and then all your mental health issues will come in and everything. So
Yeah.
mm.
And I
Oh,
think that's an important issue which Korea doesn't address very much at the moment, is
yeah,
also mental health.
yeah,
That's another
yeah,
area
yeah,
which
yeah,
there's a lot of work to be done. Yeah.
yeah. And Scott, like while talking with you earlier, on a lighter note, you mentioned very fondly about your visit to India. Like, can you briefly talk about that? And by the way, do you enjoy Indian food? And I think you must be getting a lot of that back home in the UK, right? Like all the curries
Of
and
course.
everything. So,
Yeah.
any Indian restaurants you frequent here in Seoul, or have you visited them?
Well, can I ask what part of India you're from?
I'm from Bihar, like Eastern India.
Right, yes. So there were about six aspects to your question. I'll start with, I of
Okay,
course love Indian food.
okay.
How can you not?
Oh, yeah.
uh, I grew up in London for most of my life,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of
It's very
Indian
multicultural,
restaurants.
right? London is
Yeah,
very
yeah.
multi, yeah.
And there's so much access to Indian food. I mean, there's a lot of there's a large Indian population in London.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't think you can grow up in London without liking Indian food. I think that's just impossible. So I love
Definitely.
Indian food.
Yeah.
And your question about Indian food in Seoul, I
Hmm.
have not
Hmm. Yes.
been able to find an
Oh,
Indian
yeah.
restaurant which I particularly feel is that good.
Same with
Uh,
me. Yeah. Same
yeah,
situation. Yes.
it's all been Koreanized. So there's
Oh,
all these kind
everything.
of
Yeah.
weird hybrid dishes which they
Oh,
put
yeah.
sugar on everything, and it just is disgusting. And
You
um,
like end up asking like, where's the spice or where's the that Indian typical Indian flavor like
yeah,
from back home?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. But having said that, the pastor at my church is Indian,
Oh, okay.
and he once cooked us the most delicious Indian food. Really was
Oh,
absolutely
wow.
brilliant. So if you're really craving some food from India, let me know, and I'll speak to him.
Sure.
He can hit you up.
Yeah.
As for my trip to India, I went there in 2015. I spent a month traveling around India.
Okay.
Basically, I went to the northwest, south, and center, and the only part of India I didn't go to was to the east,
Northeast. Yeah.
unfortunately.
East. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I had a great time. I traveled a lot. I went to about, I think, 8 or 9 cities, and
Wow. Yeah.
I was disappointed because I didn't get to spend very much time in the countryside. I basically
Ah,
just
yes.
spent time in the cities. But India's a huge country with so much to see, and I felt like a month wasn't enough to even scratch the surface. But it was I really had a wonderful time there, and it was my first time traveling solo,
Oh,
so
okay.
that's
Mm.
quite a big
A big
adventure for me.
adventure. Yeah.
Yeah, backpacking on my own in India.
Wow.
But I learned a lot about the world and about myself, and I ate some incredible food, and I saw great things, and I learned a lot. So yeah, if you're watching this or listening to this and you've never been to India, do make sure you get on over there, because it's a great place to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Scott, we are like running out of time now. Like we're approaching the end of the session. And
Okay.
anyways, I wanted to ask you like, first of all, thank you very much for writing articles in the Korea Times. I was like just now I was reading your yesterday's article on the cell phones and in
Yes.
the subway, and I was actually talking about that with my wife. Like we were on the subway, and I was saying like everybody is on their phones. How about picking up a book or something? But anyway,
Yeah.
so thank you very much for writing very interesting articles. And often I find like your articles like touch upon the societal aspects a lot. Like we can relate to it. Like reading it, I'm saying, yeah, yeah, he's right. Like I've seen people like on the phone or about the mask you wrote in your other article, and yeah,
Right.
so thank you very much for writing those articles. And how has it changed your life or your perspective, like writing columns in the Korea Times? And would you recommend like people who are beginning to learn English or having a grasp on it to try to write articles like that. And do you have any tips for a new writer?
Wow. Okay, a lot in that question.
Yeah,
First of all, I thank you for those very nice things you said about my articles. Um, yes, writing the Career Times articles has changed the way I think. I
yeah,
think is probably fair. Um, it's I used to write every 2 weeks, and
yes.
that
Mhm.
is really hard to kind of
Oh
come up
yes,
with something which I felt was
it is.
relevant and
It is.
important, and I couldn't sustain that, especially with my main job and the other work that I do.
Yes.
So I cut it down to once a month,
Mhm.
which kind of feels like maybe I could do a bit more. So it's kind
Yes.
of in between. um,
Yeah.
I write
I
basically
understand.
I try to write about things which I think are important and
Mhm.
which need some sort of change or something. I also I want to make it clear that I'm not necessarily wed to everything I always write. Sometimes I change my mind, and
Yeah.
I might look back on an old article I wrote and think, is
Mhm.
that right? Or did I phrase my maybe I didn't come across as clearly as I could have, or maybe I just completely changed my opinion. But
Sure.
for aspiring writers, I mean, I'm not sure I'm a writer. I write some stuff, but I wouldn't call myself a writer. Definitely this kind of thing where I have a deadline, I have the pressure of knowing that it's going to be published in the real world, so people are going to see it, and if they hate it, they
That's a
let me
big
know.
pressure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes you get angry emails. Sometimes
Oh, really?
most of the time,
Have you
yeah, most of
received?
the time I've got very
Ah,
most
have
of
you
the time it's
received?
very positive, but
Yeah,
yeah.
most
So
of
go
them.
on.
Yeah, I also
Yeah.
received messages and email, and so far they have all been positive. So I'm
Yes.
intrigued by you mentioning like you get some negative emails as well sometimes.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
we talked about xenophobia. One email was telling me to go back home, which is the classic,
oh,
the
oh
classic
yeah, the
racist thing.
classic. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
but
back to where you
I
came from. Yes.
exactly that's exactly what it said, and I think that kind of thing is just like you
Oh,
kind of
yeah,
brush it off, And I'd rather get a few emails which are kind of
sure.
angry with what I wrote to show that actually I've been writing something which has touched a nerve, which is important.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, it's an interesting thing to do, and I'm glad I do it. I hope that what I can do through it is make some positive change.
Okay.
There's so much division and hatred in the world,
Oh
and
yeah.
often what people think is if someone disagrees with me, I must hate them, I must destroy them, and that's wrong. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of the discourse that you see, especially over in particularly sensitive areas. You see that, and
Oh
you
yes.
think like it's just there's so much hatred on every side here, and I try not to stoke that. I hope I don't stoke that, and I try to understand. Even if I disagree with people, I try to seek an area where we can understand each
Of
other and
course.
where we can
Yeah.
seek to unite to sort of work
I
towards
think
common
that
goals.
dialogue is the way. Like, of
Yeah,
course, they are gonna have different opinions than you. Like,
yeah,
everyone thinks differently,
of course.
and that's very actually very fruitful that everybody thinks differently, so that you can have various pieces to put together and come up with something beautiful. But
Yeah,
most times, what like you said, like people only think in black and white terms, no gray
yeah,
area. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
always the division that prevails. But somehow we should try to overcome that and make people see that like it's a division which shouldn't happen. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, there are some times where you're going to fundamentally be divided about something,
of
but
course. Yeah, yeah.
even if you are, there's this kind of automatic assumption that since we're divided, I
Mhm.
must crush the enemy or
Oh
something like
yes.
that, and it's not healthy for a democracy. And
Mhm.
so I try to show understanding through my writing and try
Yeah,
to seek that. Maybe I don't always succeed, but that's what I
of course. Yeah.
aspire to. Yeah.
Anyway,
And
so
I would encourage others to do that as well. I would encourage others to try writing and to put forward their views, which is the answer to your one part of your question. It's good, it's fun, it's a
yeah,
challenge, but it
it's
does help
fun.
you to
Yeah,
grow.
it
Yeah.
is challenging, but it's like very like you you grow by writing,
Mhm.
and you like think in various different directions which you might not have earlier. Trying to solve a problem in your head and reading articles to prepare for that article and like condensing all that information into your own. So that is something
Yes.
very meaningful.
Yeah. Completely. Yeah. It's a good discipline. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I really enjoy reading your articles, so thumbs
Thank
up
you.
for
I
that.
enjoy writing them.
Yeah. So, Scott, so we are like at the end of our session, and do you have any comments or any questions for me, or otherwise we'll just.
I think one last comment would be for those listening to this who have never tried living abroad, which is,
Yeah, yeah, that's
this
yeah,
it's a big, terrifying thing, and in some ways it's really
yeah,
hard. But I would
yeah,
encourage, to travel is to understand
mm,
the world a bit, and I've learned a lot by living here
yeah,
in Korea. The truth is that I think everyone growing up thinks the way I do things is the right way. And
yes.
when you go to another culture, which is so completely different as
Oh,
Korea
yes,
is from the UK, you can see that actually it's not that mine is the only right way. And sometimes it helps you to reflect a lot on your own, to see actually it's okay to do things differently.
sure.
And it sort of helps you to challenge a lot of assumptions. And I
Yeah,
would
also you
encourage
you
people to
like
travel.
question in your head like why you're doing that way,
Yeah,
that thing that way earlier, and here
yeah.
people are doing the same thing differently, and what's the difference, and which way would you like to do in yourself? So yeah.
Yeah, and it challenges a lot of your own assumptions about the superiority of your own
Oh
way of
yes,
doing
yes,
things.
yeah.
And I can now see a lot of things about myself, which
Mhm.
I probably wouldn't have realized this is a problem if I had never moved abroad. So,
Yeah.
give it a try.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much, Scott, for joining us today, and I really enjoyed our conversation. And hopefully, like we stay in touch, and maybe I can get you on the podcast somewhere down the line, and we can talk more.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I'd love to,
Yeah.
come back sometime. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Scott. Have a nice day,
Thank
and
you.
see you around.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.